Hi everybody, welcome to this event today. My name is Ryan and I am the Manager of Sustainability Programs here at Deakin, so part of the sustainability team. I'd firstly like to just start with an acknowledgement of country. I wish to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land in which we are gathered today. We pay our respects to their elders and ancestors for allowing us to have this gathering on their land, acknowledging their continuing connection to this beautiful country, and thank them for their care and custodianship over many thousands of years. I extend this respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. Education has a long and rich heritage on this continent, which we aim to honour and reflect in the ways we teach and learn. The university has a really long tradition of sustainability. It's embedded in our core values. It's in our strategic plan, our ideas to impact, and it covers all 5 impact themes in that. Our commitments cover 7 key pillars of sustainability. So we have energy and emissions, water, waste, natural environment, built environment, travel, transport and procurement. So our job traditionally has been to, develop strategy across these key pillars and then operationalise projects out of those strategies. We've had commitments for 2020, 2025 and 2030 that we're trying to hit across each of those sustainability pillars. Some examples of, the projects that have come out of that strategy are things like our revegetation work that's gone across all campuses, our conversion of ponds to wetlands at the Warren Ponds campus has been a major piece of work, and then the continued electrification across the campuses and the 7.1 megawatt microgrid at our Warren Ponds campus as well. Sustainability is now within the partnerships portfolio at Deakin. Gives us a really exciting opportunity because we're moving into a phase where we're going to look at how we integrate sustainability across all of our teaching, all of our research and all of our operations within the university. So probably been a bit more operational focused, and now we're moving into how do we embed it across everything that we do within the universities. One of the big focuses this year is developing a comprehensive decarbonisation strategy that will address the full spectrum of Deakin's emission profile. And this work will guide our efforts to reduce our carbon footprint, align with global sustainability goals, and ensure we maintain a resilient, innovative and forward-thinking institution. I really look forward to hearing from our panel today as we continue to build on our shared commitment to sustainability and make meaningful progress towards a sustainable future. So we have Dr. Trevor Thornton, who's a Senior Lecturer in Sustainability Education, whose research interests lie in the management of hazardous waste, clinical related waste, environment management systems and municipal waste management. We then have Dr. Negin Amini, who's a lecturer in environmental engineering, and her research interests lie in minerals processing to ultimately reduce emissions, water and energy use. And finally on the end here we have Professor Tim Dempster, who is a Professor of Marine Biology and Aquaculture, and he is also Director of Deakin's Marine Research and Innovation Centre down in Queenscliff. So let's give them all a big welcome and enjoy.
I'm really delighted to be facilitating this conversation as part of the Deakin 50 celebrations. And I'd, of course, also like to thank our 3 outstanding panel members for being here today. And also acknowledge that each of you bring unique perspectives on sustainability from waste management, clean energy, aquaculture, biodiversity. So I think this will make a really interesting conversation. So I'm going to start by zooming out a little bit. Climate change is a massive, complex issue, but each discipline, again, brings a unique lens to the table. So I'd really like to hear from each of you. What do you see as the biggest challenges that we face within your specific area of work? And Tim, your background in marine biology, I think, will bring a distinct perspective to this.
Climate change is certainly something that we work on across all of our projects. It's a lens that affects everything that we do. In my area of aquaculture, everyone is trying to reduce their emissions across all of the different industries are looking at that very closely at the moment. One of the very interesting parts of aquaculture is that we have some areas that are producing emissions, but we have things that are reducing emissions. So we're trying to get the world to focus on those things that reduce emissions, like seaweeds and kelps and other things. And another great innovation which I wanted to mention is there's something like ruminants or cows and sheep produce about 10% of our global emissions. And there's a very unique Australian invention that is really beginning to be amplified and commercialised now, which is one particular type of seaweed that when we feed it to those animals in the right dose, knocks out their methane emission. And that's called Asparagopsis. It's a red seaweed. And there's Australia-based research into basically aquaculture of those seaweeds. There's companies now in Tasmania, Victoria, South Australia, New South Wales that are producing this. And I think in the next 10 years, we'll see that scale up to be a very large industry, which will then be reducing those global emissions. So that's that aquaculture is actually trying to target other people's problems in terms of carbon emissions and creating climate change. So.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tim. So, Trevor, given your work in waste and sustainability policy, what stands out to you as a core challenge?
Probably getting individuals and companies to change their behaviours, both in the purchasing and what they do with their waste at the end of the day. So, for example, food waste is an enormous issue, both economically, socially, environmentally, and so that we all throw away about somewhere between $2,000 to $3,000 worth of food every year, which is good food we should be cooking. It's like walking into your household. I've got all my shopping bags. I'll throw half of them in the rubbish bin and then I'll go inside. We shouldn't be doing that. So we need to have a look at it at that level, at that very individual level. We also have a look at the suppliers in terms of the supermarkets, etc., and the way, you can't go in and buy one. I wanted to buy one celery stalk the other day. It was cheaper for me to buy a whole celery than a packet of celery stalks sort of thing. So we've got to look at that equity type of issue. But then we've got to look at the policy and what we do with that. So things such as, do we ban food waste from landfill, which we've done with other waste items because of the environmental impact, etc. So that's just one example. But for me, it's about, I guess, conveying to the students here at Deakin and anybody else I'm dealing with, what are the issues? You do one thing could have a negative impact on another. So sort of looking at that triple bottom line approach and then try to coordinate it so it's not just food waste, it's packaging, it's a whole range of other things. So really more at that sort of lower level, individual level focus on.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because that is something that all of us as individuals can do something about. Yeah, thank you so much. And Negin, from an environmental engineering perspective, what do you see as the biggest challenges?
So the research that I am focused on is in the minerals processing field, and in Australia the mining sector is one of the highest, if not the highest contributor or user of energy. And so we work in collaboration with other universities as a part of a centre of excellence to on many different projects to try and reduce the energy and water usage in the processing of minerals, and also in trying to recover the valuable metals that are lost in the current processes. If you look at the large picture, it's quite significant, the impact that it has, and so our research will help Australia reduce its negative impact.
Amazing, thank you so much. So we've got some very big kind of overwhelming challenges there, and I'm sure that's just scratching the surface. We have 3 different perspectives here. So maybe on a more hopeful note, let's shift our focus to what might be working. We know that real progress requires both innovation as well as structural change. So what are some of the technologies or approaches in your fields that give you hope or are already kind of making tangible results? And Negin, because we've just heard from you, I'm going to start with you.
What comes to mind is a project that I'm working on in the tailings dams area. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but in the minerals processing area, if the waste that is generated contains toxic chemicals, heavy metals, and water. And these are usually stored. I went and visited a mine. Their tailings dam is actually a valley. And I asked a question, what happens when you reach your capacity? And they said that we just extend the valley. And so a project that is really important is one that our PhD student looked at dewatering tailings, so removing the water and reusing it back in the minerals processing area, and then having stackable dry tailings that we stack, and it takes less space and there's no potential for collapse of tailings dams, which have been reported. Particularly recently, I think a week ago in Zambia in Africa, there was a collapse of a tailings dam. And the impact that has is really significant on the ecosystem, on the community. To just talk about the innovation. So the PhD student was worked in collaboration with Melbourne University, and he looked at a unique flocculant that would then be used in a prototype dewatering system that we actually made using our 3D printing facilities down at Warm Ponds. And it's been very successful so far, and he's towards the end of his PhD. So hopefully his PhD will then be translated to our industry partners, who can then eliminate tailings dams at the end of the day.
Since we're having microphone issues on this side, I'm going to pass on to Trevor, if that's okay. So any innovations or shifts that you're seeing in waste management or the other areas that we're working that are making a real difference?
I think from my perspective, it's about getting probably some more science, some more data, some more information into the decision-making process. Are we burning resources that should be reused, recycled, etc.? But often they're not. Taking the soft plastics and so forth as an answer. High calorific value, but let's also focus on the avoidance and all that sort of stuff. It's not a simple solution. So are we better off burning particular waste? And we can design these things so you have what's called a dirty MRF, a materials recovery facility at the front, so you can take out all the valuable materials that you can recycle, reuse, and then you burn what's left and you create energy. Is that better than burning the current dirty coal and so forth that we do? So we need to do those analyses. Looking at a more local level, a more individual level, the state government's mandated that every council has to have a 4-bin system. But having done some research, that there are some councils have drop-off points for their glass. And contamination and recycling systems are a really big issue. That's why we had major issues a couple of years ago with them going bust. Those who have the drop-off systems have a contamination rate of 1 to 2% versus about a 6% for those who have the bins at home. So now it's going to cost a lot more for companies to collect it, sort it, and dispose of it, and that's going to come back to us as ratepayers. We've got a state government that is, in a sense, dug its heels in about a 4-bin system, but they need to listen to the data, but that's the sort of thing that we need to have a look at. So it's that convoluted sort of argument to try and work your way through to come up what is the best policy decision, but also the best decision for households, looking again at cost and so forth.
Globally, there's a lot of habitat that we need to restore, whether that's seagrass or mangrove or oyster reefs or shellfish habitat or giant kelp forests. And one thing aquaculture does really well is it makes a lot of plants and animals very efficiently. And we're starting to see a convergence between conservation organisations and the aquaculture industry, where the conservation groups that are wanting to restore habitats are tapping into that knowledge and industrial capacity that they need to be able to do things on scale. And that's something that we're working with very actively at Deakin. So that's really starting to work well, and we're starting to see a lot more marine restoration at scale around the world.
That's really lovely. That's really hopeful. And it's really inspiring generally to see progress, but also recognising that we need to kind of keep this momentum going for the next generation as well, and equip them to tackle these type of issues. So, universities are more than just places of research, of course. We shape the next generation of thinkers and of leaders. So how do you see sustainability being embedded into teaching, and how can we better prepare students to meet real-world challenges? Trevor, I know that you've spoken before about embedding sustainability across the curriculum, and what do you think that looks like at Deakin?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because there is this push to ensure that all the units, or where applicable, contain detail about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, etc. But what we're starting to find is students are getting that at a low level in the secondary schools, etc. So the challenge is not, for now, not to necessarily teach them about the sustainability goals, etc., but more how do you implement it in the various workplaces, etc. So, for example, I have a lot of what we call authentic assessments. The students have to go out and do something in an organisation, implement environment management, or start the process, or do a waste assessment, or whatever. So now they're starting to, in that aspect, evaluate the organisation as to how they're adhering, how they're meeting, responding to the relevant sustainable development goals. So for the students, it's about learning how do I look at those 17 and which are applicable to this organisation, why or why not, and then how, for those who are, where are they at, and then what can they do and what should they be recommending as an action plan to get there. So I think that's the challenge for us. So not just teaching about them, but getting them to work out how to actually put them into practice in the workplace. We've got to make it relevant for them, but then hopefully it gets balanced. So those who are doing, say, law or commerce, perhaps are learning more about that economic side of things in the environment, the more sustainability, environmental sort of issues, and thinking more about policy and implementation. So yeah, that's where I see it going.
And Negin, what about your experiences? If there's any kind of approaches to your own teaching or other insights that you've got?
In the School of Engineering, we have project-oriented design-based learning. So we focus on real-life projects and we get them to work in teams and assess them around that way. For this particular unit, they have their own project and we ask them to discuss amongst themselves how they think which SDGs are the most relevant. And got conversations started that way, turned into a group discussion, and yeah, I thought it was really good and should be implemented more.
Are there any ways that your research feeds into student learning or opens opportunities for students?
Mostly I interact with postgraduate students, and in our area they typically come to everything they do with a sustainability lens. So they're already thinking deeply about sustainability when they're asking their research questions to test with experiments. What is interesting though, and I think what we teach well, is when it becomes very complicated, because you might fix one problem and then create another one that you haven't seen downstream. In our area of aquaculture, when we're farming animals, a really important thing and an interaction which is quite difficult to deal with sometimes is we have an interaction sometimes between what might be sustainable and what might be good for animal welfare. And those are two pillars. We have to work on both of them simultaneously. And sometimes there's no clear or easy answer to that, but it's about working out where the dice is falling, usually providing that advice to industry and then they're having to make a proper decision. But we find that when we're providing the full evidence on both sides of the equation, then better decisions are able to be made, more balanced decisions are able to be made.
You have such a fascinating mix of projects, and I'd really like to hear more about the toad containment zone. So what is the goal of that project and why is it so important for biodiversity?
Okay, so I'm mostly an aquaculture researcher, but I have hobbies. I mostly work on pests and parasites, and so the cane toad is a pest. It's been invading across all of northern Australia. It's basically gone all the way from Queensland to Broome in 90 years. It's about to invade Broome. And as it hits the west coast of WA, it can turn south and eventually it will make its way all the way to the Pilbara. And if it gets to the Pilbara, it'll invade about 27 million more hectares of Australia, which is quite a lot, and knock out lots of species. It's toxic when our native species eat it, things like quolls and goannas and various things. Thus far, we haven't been able to stop cane toads at all, and there's probably 500 million across northern Australia. But they have what we call an Achilles heel, and that is in the dry season when the landscape dries out, they need water, and they need access to water every day or two. And as they're moving between Broome and this place down in the Pilbara, which is about 500 kilometres, there's only a little coastal strip that they'll be able to go down because inside of that is the Great Sandy Desert and it's too dry. And so if we remove all of the water sources on the ground, and we can do that here because they're all agricultural water sources, there aren't rivers, there aren't any natural water sources, and we basically dry out the landscape, turn it back into the desert that it once was, that will stop the cane toad invasion. It's a big project. Cost about $20 million to implement over 8 or 9 years. As luck would have it, it is probably the first time, if the cane toads get to the Pilbara, that cane toads will have a major industrial impact, and that will be that it will be much harder to go mining in the Pilbara, because as they knock down populations of native species, all of the environmental compliance for the mining companies will increase. So the mining companies are motivated to help us put this zone in. So that's something that we'll roll out, hopefully. We've got 3 years to get it in before the toads get there.
Your research as well, it extends beyond Australia, and you've got efforts to include hospital waste management in the South Pacific. So can you share some insights on, I think it was capacity building programs for hospital staff?
So it was a case of going into these, into the various hospitals, healthcare centres, etc., and say, what is practical and what do we want to do? What are the major issues? So, for example, sharps injuries are a major issue. So here we have sharps containers. They can't afford sharps containers. We have incinerators. They don't have incinerators. So is it better off burning in a pit on the ground because you're getting rid of the infection hazard as well as potentially the health and so on? So it's very much a case of saying, okay, doing that, and then empowering them with the resources to be able to implement and train the upcoming nurses, doctors and so forth, but then working at a government level to get policy change.
What are the research projects happening in your area of expertise that you are really excited about, that you are following and really interested to find out what happens? Generally
within marine science, I'm fascinated by attempts that people are making for really large-scale restoration. Often I look at some of them and think, that will never work. Why are they doing that? But I reserve judgment and give them about 10 years because that's how long it really takes to start with a concept and get it to the point where it might be able to be scalable. So I'm fascinated by the many groups around the world that are trying to restore coral reefs. I think that is an extraordinarily challenging task given the scale that needs to happen. So there's a lot of great ideas, but the scale in my mind is boggling. I like to see around Australia and the world also there's enormous attempts to restore lost oyster reefs. Few of you would know that most of the seafloor in Port Phillip Bay used to be oysters before it was all dredged out, turned into lime and stuck into the buildings in the CBD 150 years ago. That's what they're built out of, mostly oysters in between the buildings. So oyster reef, the people that are doing the big scale oyster reef restoration, mangrove restoration, those are the projects I really like to see their results, and I'm cheering them on from the sidelines because I'd really like to see them succeed. So,
I think for me it's not one project itself. I think the fact that now there's a myriad of projects out there to try and use what would otherwise go to landfill. We use a lot more plastics and glass and roadway, plastics in concrete, etc. So they're the things that sort of excite me because, again, going back, talking to people, I always say there's a solution for that particular problem and then move on from there.
So as a part of the generous funding provided by the ARC Centre of Excellence for Minerals Beneficiation, I was able to hopefully get soon an LCA software, so a life cycle assessment tool, to use on my own work. The opportunity it provides for collaboration with other schools, and I am hopefully going to collaborate with some IFM researchers on their batteries. And the life cycle impact assessment tool helps us visualize that. It really shows you if you use waste, you actually eliminate the need to get anything from the ground and anything to manufacture, and you're just working with what's already in the economy.
What would be a simple message that I could take home tonight and share with my family that will make a real impact?
My message, and I say to the students, they should, when they go anywhere, they should be asking, why are you using it, why are you producing it? And then think about the answer from there on.
My advice would be to reuse something as much as you can until the material is worthless.
Look, on the seafood side, I'd say use a sustainable seafood guide to direct your seafood consumption.
What role do you think that universities like Deakin play in influencing, climate change, or not climate change, in each of your respective areas and sustainability?
Deakin's in a very powerful position because, we've got thousands of voices leaving here every year. And if they've got the consistent messages, it teach them to sort of evaluate, to think carefully about the things that we are doing in terms of research. So I think we're in that real powerful space that hopefully we can lobby, but advise and educate and so forth.
I think just providing students with real life examples and the impact it has on the environment and the communities will help them to really understand the impact that they can have, whether it's in their personal life or when they go out into the workforce.
I think it's about, as a supervisor, guiding them in the direction that might generate information that's going to have a broader impact and improve sustainability.
Thank you for sharing the incredible work that you've been doing. I've learned so much, I'm sure that the audience have as well. And thank you for doing your part in shaping a more sustainable world too. From practical innovations to kind of big picture systems thinking, it's really clear that sustainability isn't just a research focus. It's a responsibility that we all share. And of course, also have a look at the Deakin 50 exhibition in the gallery just by the entrance here. It's absolutely fantastic and it's well worth your time. So have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you again for being part of this really important discussion, and please thank our panel members. Thank you.